Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I just recently found out that despite the fact I've been going in and out all of the Disney parks for the last month, I just recently noticed that there are historical markers inside the Disney parks, inside all 4 parks and Disney Springs. So of course, as soon as I found that out, I knew I have to do a video on these. I was in Animal Kingdom for probably the 4th time since I got my annual pass. Was headed towards Dinosaur, and I saw, I think it was Iron, the plaque for the Tyrannosaurus Rex, which is the only historical marker in Animal Kingdom. And I was like, wait a minute. I do a lot of this on my channel. I love historical markers. I love the HMDB website, Historical Marker Database website. And it's also there's an app called Explore Here. So I have gone around over the last couple of weeks and collected all of the historical markers in all 4 Disney parks, and there's one at Disney Springs. And I'm going to compile them all in one video and show you the markers in case maybe you've never noticed them in the parks and why those items or those places are historically significant. I hope you like this video. This is my jam. Let's get started.
We are going to start this tour in Hollywood Studios, which has one historical marker here in honor of an animated short film released in 1914 by American cartoonist and animator Winsor McCay called Gertie the Dinosaur. McCay was a pioneer in comic strips and animation, and in 1912 he consulted with the American Historical Society about creating a presentation featuring depictions of the great monsters that once roamed the earth. He hoped to create serious educational work enabled by animation. He created this dinosaur and was stumped on what to name it. An animator for Disney named Paul Satterfield recalled hearing McCay tell a story in 1915 about how he ultimately chose the name of Gertie. McCay had overheard a couple of gay men in the hallway of his studio speaking to each other. One of the men said, "Oh, Bertie, wait a minute," in a very sweet voice. McCay thought Bertie had a nice ring to it, but he wanted the dinosaur to be a female, so he named her Gertie. Although prior animations had briefly included dinosaurs, Gertie became the first animated film to fully feature a dinosaur. Gertie was animated in a naturalistic style unprecedented for the time. She breathed rhythmically, shifted her weight as she moved, and her abdominal muscles undulated as she drank water. Initially, her film was presented before live audiences as part of a vaudeville act by Winsor McCay. In the comic strip, Gertie is a frisky, childlike character who appears out of a cave after being called by her master, eating a boulder and a tree on her way out. Her master wields a whip and orders her to do tricks like raising her foot or bowing to the audience. She nips at a sea serpent in one scene, for which she is scolded and she begins to cry. Her master then placates her with a pumpkin. Gertie eats the leftover tree trunk and tosses a mammoth named Jumbo into the lake. Jumbo teases her by spraying her with water, and she hurls a boulder at him until he swims away. Gertie then drinks from the lake before being carried off stage by McCay as he bows to the audience. Gertie is popularly thought to be the earliest animated film, but McCay had actually made 2 prior animations, Little Nemo in 1911 and How a Mosquito Operates in 1912. Gertie is the best preserved of McCay's films, some of which have been lost or only survive in fragments. In 1991, the U.S. Library of Congress selected the film for preservation in the National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. Other artists had experimented with animation even earlier than 1911, but Gertie was the first film to employ animation techniques like keyframes, registration marks, tracing paper, the mutoscope action viewer, and animation loops. Gertie also influenced the next generation of animators that included the greats like the Fleischer Brothers, Otto Mesmer, Paul Terry, Walter Lantz, and even Walt Disney. Now we're traveling over to Disney Springs to check out the one and only historical marker there, which is near Michael and my favorite restaurant in Disney Springs called the Boathouse. This marker is in honor of the Amphicars, And if you've ever hung out in this area of Disney Springs, you've no doubt seen these little cars zipping around on the lake. They are so cool to watch. The Amphicar Model 770 is an amphibious automobile which was launched at the 1961 New York Auto Show. It was originally designed by Hans Trippel and made in West Germany and marketed from 1961 until 1968. A new term had to be invented, hence the name Amphicar, as a portmanteau of amphibious and car, and a total of 3,878 models were manufactured in the single generation of production. Most Amphicars were sold to Americans in the United States. Some were used in the Berlin Police Department, and others were fitted out for rescue operations. The Amphicar offered only modest performance compared to most contemporary boats or cars, and it featured navigation lights and a flag as mandated by the U.S. Coast Guard. After only one operation in the water, it required greasing at 13 points, one of which required removing the rear seat. It was described by Petrolicious as good for only one thing, fun. It's not quick or flashy, but it's iconic, unique, and friendly. What more could you ask from a vintage car? The Amphicar makes no sense, and that's precisely why it's so wonderful. The Amphicar's engine was mounted at the rear of the craft, driving the rear wheels through a 4-speed manual transmission. For use in the water, the same engine drove a pair of reversible propellers at the rear with a second gear level engaging forward or reverse. Once in the water, the main gear lever would normally be left in neutral. By engaging first gear as well as drive to the propellers when approaching a boat ramp, the Amphicar could drive itself back out of the water. Today, Amphicar owners regularly convene during the spring, summer, and fall at various locations nationwide for swim-ins, the largest of which is held at Grand Lake St. Mary's State Park in Ohio. In 2015, the Boathouse at Walt Disney World's Disney Springs began offering public Amphicar rides to visitors, charging $125 per ride for groups of up to 3 people. Disney heavily re-engineered and enhanced the 8 Amphicars in their fleet for safety, reliability, and comfort, but the various colors are all original. It's an overcast day here in Animal Kingdom as we go look for the historical marker that started it all for me, dedicated to one of the most famous fossils ever found, the fossil of Sue, the Tyrannosaurus rex. In 1990, fossil hunter Sue Hendrickson discovered an incredibly well-preserved T-Rex skeleton in South Dakota. At 42 feet long and 13 feet tall, the dinosaur, who was named Sue in her honor, is the largest and most complete T-Rex ever found. And this discovery gave paleontologists an unprecedented look at the life of one of history's most fearsome predators. After a dramatic legal battle over ownership, Sue was auctioned off in 1997 to the Chicago Field Museum for $8.36 million, the highest price ever paid for a fossil. She is now a star attraction at that museum. One of the bidding losers was actually the Walt Disney World Company, who hoped to win the auction and display the original Sue fossils at their newest theme park called Animal Kingdom, set to open the following year. Instead, Disney casted a perfect resin and fiberglass replica of Sue from the detailed molds of the real Sue fossil, which allowed scientists to continue to study her without risking any damage to the original. There are 2 historical markers in Epcot, one in the United Kingdom and one in the Norway pavilions of the World Showcase. The first marker in the United Kingdom is in honor of a man named Thomas Twining, an English merchant who in 1706 became one of the first individuals to introduce the custom of drinking tea to the English. Twining was the son of a fuller who had moved to London when Thomas was 9 years old. Thomas went on to apprentice to become a weaver, but eventually changed his career and went to work for a merchant. He worked for the East India Company and eventually bought a coffee shop called Tom's Coffee House at number 216 Strand, London in 1706. In addition to coffee, Thomas also sold tea that he had acquired on his travels, and word of this exotic new drink spread quickly. He became known for having the finest blends in London. Shortly after opening the coffee shop, he was selling more dry than brewed tea. He expanded his business multiple times. His coffee sales dwindled, but his tea business grew exponentially. Eventually, he founded his now famous tea company called Twinings of London. English novelist Jane Austen and Charles II, Earl Grey, were Twinings tea enthusiasts, and the company began exporting teas to America, where the governor of Boston was one of the earliest American customers. Queen Victoria appointed Twinings as the official supplier of teas to her royal household, as has every British monarch since. Production increased around the world, and tea prices became affordable to all citizens. Today, the Twinings legacy sells more than 400 different types of tea blends and continues their pledge to create exceptional teas available to everyone, a promise that has remained the company's cornerstone for more than 300 years. In the Norway Pavilion, we have a historical marker to honor the iconic stave churches outside of this building, which is a 4/5 replica of Norway's 12th century Gull stave church. Named for their wooden stave planks, Norway's iconic stave churches were constructed using many of the same techniques and materials that went into building Norwegian ships. To help protect the medieval structures against the harsh winters, master craftsmen designed the churches with steep roof lines and elevated them onto stone foundations, which prevented the staves from rotting in the wet ground. The result is a beautifully preserved church, identical to the replica that stands here today in the Norway Pavilion. The original Gull stave church is from approximately the year 1200, and it was long overdue for a replacement by a new building around the year 1880. The Society for the Preservation of Norwegian Ancient Monuments bought the church and presented it to King Oscar II. He paid for its complete restoration to its original look from the 1200s and had it re-erected at a new location. During Catholic times prior to the 16th century, the church was most likely decorated with colorful painted saints, and there are numerous runic inscriptions and carvings throughout dating back to the early Middle Ages inside the original church. Most of the carvings are in the chancel and show animal figures, humans, and geometric symbols. The runes on one of the staves in the nave reads, "Kiss me because I struggle," and may refer to a saint's figure that hung over the nave. After the Reformation, the fixtures from the Catholic period were gradually removed and replaced. The galleries and pulpits, usually found in post-Reformation church interiors, were added to the original church interior but were not included in King Oscar's rebuilding. In case you didn't know this, you can actually go inside this church in Epcot, and inside you'll find a really cool museum dedicated to Vikings and their lore and their gods. There are 4 historical markers inside the Magic Kingdom, and we are going to start out in Tomorrowland at the Carousel of Progress, which is one of my favorite rides in this park. The Carousel of Progress is a rotating theater auto-animatronic stage show that was originally created by Walt Disney in partnership with the General Electric Company for their pavilion at the 1964 New York World's Fair. Carousel of Progress holds the record as the longest-running stage show in the history of American theater. It is one of the oldest attractions in the Walt Disney World Resort and is also the only attraction at Disney World that has been personally worked on by Walt Disney himself. In the late 1950s, after the initial success of Disneyland, Walt Disney was in the process of planning to expand Main Street USA. but the ideas he was coming up with weren't feasible at the time with the current technology available. In 1964, the General Electric Company approached him about developing a show for the World Fair, and Disney leaped at the opportunity to work with them and potentially bring some of his stalled ideas to life. He pitched the idea of an electrical progress to the GE executives, who loved it. Disney's Imagineers began perfecting the audio animatronic technology necessary to operate the performers in this show, using techniques similar to what had already been done in the Enchanted Tiki Room and Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln attractions. The Imagineers also upgraded the ideas to include a carousel-type theater so that the audience could remain seated and ride around through a stationary set of stages, which would allow the audience to remain comfortable and eliminate time-consuming disruptions between acts. Songwriters Richard and Robert Sherman were enlisted to create a song to bridge the acts in the show. They wrote, "There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow," based on Walt Disney's palpable enthusiasm for this project, later saying that they considered it to be Walt Disney's theme song because he was always so optimistic and excited about the future. The show opened at the New York World's Fair and was one of the most popular attractions, as over 200 people entered and exited the show every 4 minutes. A massive queue was erected in 1965 when the show returned to the fair to accommodate the crowds demanding to enter the ride. This ultimately caused the Carousel of Progress to be Disney's first ride with a sign that dynamically displayed wait times. Carousel of Progress reopened in Disneyland in 1967, 7 months after Walt Disney's death, with very small differences from the World Fair version, and sponsored by General Electric. However, in the 1970s, audience enthusiasm for this ride dwindled, and General Electric thought they were not getting the most for their advertising dollars. GE asked Disney to move the show to their new Magic Kingdom Park in Walt Disney World, and in September of 1973, the show was packed up and moved to Florida, where it reopened in January of 1975. Extensive changes had been made at this point as a new carousel was built to accommodate not only the carousel but also the people mover track above. Other changes were made, and the ride has been updated a few times throughout the years to add new acts, reflecting the progress of the decades since the show was created. General Electric did not renew their contract when it expired in 1985, and all GE branding and logos were removed from the exterior, although their logo still exists on several appliances inside the ride. The next historical marker in the Magic Kingdom is in Frontierland, and it's here at this area where you could get in the queue to board the raft over to Tom Sawyer Island. We all know that Tom Sawyer Island is not long for this world, which is so unfortunate because it's one of the areas of Magic Kingdom I appreciate the most. If you've ever taken the steamboat ride, you would know that the captain of the boat is named Samuel Clemens, which is actually the given name of Mark Twain. Mark Twain was born in a town called Florida, Missouri in 1835 and was raised in Hannibal, Missouri, which later provided the setting for his most famous works, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer in 1876 and its sequel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in 1884. Twain became a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi River, which provided him with material for Life on the Mississippi, which was published in 1883. His wit and satire, both in his writings and in speeches that he gave, earned him praise from critics and peers, and he was a friend to American presidents, artists, industrialists, and European royalty. Twain earned a great deal of money from his writings and lectures, but he invested it in ventures that lost most of it. He filed for bankruptcy, although he later became involved with Standard Oil and was able to rebuild his fortune and pay back his creditors in full, even though his declaration of bankruptcy meant that he was not legally required to do so. Interestingly to me, Mark Twain became the vice president of the American Anti-Imperialist League from 1901 until his death in 1910, and he strongly opposed the Philippine-American War and general American colonialism, including the expansion of American interests in Hawaii. The last two historical markers in the Magic Kingdom are in Liberty Square. The first marker is here on this recasting of the Liberty Bell. I'm sure that the real Liberty Bell does not need any introduction, but since we're looking at a replica here, I thought it would be fun to share some facts about the original. The real Liberty Bell, a symbol of American independence and freedom, is on display today at the Liberty Bell Center for public viewing free of charge. The Liberty Bell weighs 2,080 pounds, stands 3 feet tall from the lip to the crown, and is made of copper and tin. It was originally cast in London in 1752 and was shipped to Philadelphia for the Pennsylvania State House, but then had to be recast in 1753 after being cracked and damaged. The inscription on the bell reads, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all inhabitants thereof," which is a passage from the Bible found in Leviticus 25:10. The bell was rung for public announcements and special occasions, including the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence on July 8, 1776. In 1777, when the British forces entered Philadelphia, the bell was hidden in Allentown, Pennsylvania, to prevent its capture. It was rung for the last time in 1846, during which it cracked irreparably. The last marker is here underneath this beautiful tree in Liberty Square, and it is in honor of a famous elm tree that stood in Boston, Massachusetts from 1646 until 1775, known as the Liberty Tree. In 1765, the American Patriots in Boston staged their first act of defiance against the British government at that very tree, and it went on to become a rallying point for the growing resistance to the rule of Britain over the American colonies. The ground surrounding the tree became known as Liberty Hall. Unfortunately, the tree was felled in August of 1775 by Loyalists. One of the most significant rebellions that took place underneath the Liberty Tree happened in 1765 after the British Parliament introduced the Stamp Act, which required all legal documents, permits, commercial contracts, newspapers, pamphlets, and even playing cards in the American colonies to carry a stamp tax. The act was met with widespread anger in the colonies, and in Boston, a group of men known as the Loyal Nine began meeting at the tree to plan a series of protests against the act. They hung a straw-stuffed effigy of the Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts from the tree. This was the first public show of defiance against the Crown, and it spawned the resistance that led to the American Revolutionary War 10 years later. Countless inflammatory cartoons and papers were nailed to the trunk of the tree during those war years. Eventually, a liberty pole was installed by the tree with a flag that could be raised above to summon townspeople to come and meet there. When the Stamp Act was repealed in 1766, the townspeople met underneath the tree to celebrate. Today, there is a plaque over where the historic tree once stood, and it is memorialized in many ways throughout the city of Boston. It seems only fitting that Walt Disney, American patriot at heart that he was, would want to plant an elm tree in his little version of Liberty Square and honor the tree that has become such a symbol of the American spirit of independence.
Okay, everybody, this might not have been new news to you, it was new news to me. And if you've been here for a while, you know that historical markers are my absolute jam. I will drive clear across town to go stand at the foot of a marker and learn something, or feel like I'm in the place where something cool happened, or see something that needs to not be forgotten. As soon as I found out we had historical markers in the Disney parks, I'm like, I'm on it. I made it a priority to collect them all, like Pokemon. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I sure had a good time making it, learning, filming, and editing this to share with you. I'll see you guys another day in another adventure.